Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're enjoying your lunch. I have to say so myself, the salad is delicious. Um, Again, my name is Diana Leon. And just to give you a little idea about what Kelly was referring to about paper, I went to law school to be a corporate attorney, specifically intellectual property. And I started working at legal services when I was still in law school. I went to law school in San Francisco. And I stuck around for one reason, and that was that the work that I did not only affected the client in front of me, but also affected the entire community. It affected the organizations that serve them, it affected government agencies, it affected their own families and friends. And one of the best examples I can give you of just what that means is to talk to you a little bit about our guardianship practice. What we do, we help grandparents, usually have their grandkids or other blood relatives who are not being cared for by their own biological parents, go through a court process to give them the legal right to make decisions for them. And we're not talking about big investments, we're talking about medical care, dental care, going to school. And I think a good example of that would be to share with you one of our cases that we had recently. I'd like to introduce you to Matthew and Jessica. Matthew is 5, Jessica is 3. Matthew and Jessica have been living with their mother, who unfortunately suffered from severe alcohol, drug addiction, and chronic unemployment. It was difficult for her to provide a home for them, so they often lived in a shelter or lived in their car. Unfortunately, her job situation never improved, but she did manage to find herself a boyfriend who did not really like children. And she decided that it was in her best interest to keep this relationship. And she took her 2 children and decided that the best folks to leave them with would be her parents. Let's call them Mr. and Mrs. Diaz. Mr. and Mrs. Diaz have been long-term Monterey County residents. They've worked in the fields for more than 20 years, and they were still working at the point where their grandchildren came to live with them. On this particular day, it was a Wednesday, around 8 a.m., their mother decided to drop them off, not telling Mr. and Mrs. Diaz that she was coming, not leaving them with a responsible adult, simply picking up her 5 and 3-year-old and putting them inside the front yard fence and telling them, wait for your grandparents to pick you up. You're going to live with your grandparents now. Now these children, again, 5 and 3 at 8 o'clock in the morning, were left only with the clothes that they were wearing and were asked to sit in the stoops of the home. Eventually, neighbors started noticing that there were a couple of babies out in their front yard and tried to ask them to come into the home, try to feed them, try to help them. And Matthew, being a responsible young little boy, decided, no, we need to wait on the stoops for our grandparents. Eventually, their grandparents arrived around 6 or 7 o'clock and found them. Obviously, they hadn't eaten. They were clearly in distress and had been for some time. Brought them into the home and asked, where's your mother? Matthew said, she left. She said, we're going to live with you now. While Mrs. Diaz tried to take care of the children and make sure that, they were okay and feed them, Mr. Diaz was out trying to find his daughter. Could not find his daughter. And eventually they started to live just like that. Mr. and Mrs. Diaz were still working because they needed to, but it got to the point where they were so young, not both of them could work, and they couldn't afford any kind of daycare. So Mr. and Mrs. Diaz made the decision to keep Ms. Diaz at home to care for them, and Mr. Diaz obtained a second job. This was very hard on the family. Obviously, they were already living under economic strains, and now with 2 more mouths to feed, it became really difficult. Eventually, Matthew, like any other child, had a toothache. He complained about his teeth bothering him. They did what I think anyone would do. They took him immediately to their local dentist, and the dentist said, we can't help you because you either need mom's approval, dad's approval, or you need legal guardianship. Fortunately, Mrs. Diaz was able to resort to some home remedies, and that kind of helped stave the pain a little bit. But Matthew was 5. Matthew had never attended school, so they decided to also register him for school. Again, they were met with the same response. You can't register him from school. We need mom, dad, or we need you to have legal guardianship. Fortunately, they went through different avenues and eventually came to our office, and we were able to sit down with them, explain to them what the guardianship process is, the cost, Most can't afford the filing petition. We talked about fee waivers. We talked about service of process of finding parents, finding family members to give notice. We talked about that cost. We talked about what to expect, just the realities of taking on this responsibility, not short-term, but long-term as well. And they decided to proceed with the process. One of the things that we do, again, we're not only dealing with the person in front of us, we wanted to make sure that these children were taken care of long-term, so we asked them to apply for those social services, get the Medi-Cal, get the cash aid. Clients did exactly what we asked them to do. They went down there and found out that mom was still receiving the cash aid. We talked about expecting mom to show up. Unfortunately, we deal with it often enough that they show up and they're upset because their services or their money has been cut off. Sure enough, mom showed up and client was prepared to find out where she lived, to find out more information about what was going on with her. She claimed she was going to come pick them up because she was really upset she had not received her money the first of the month. Of course, she never picked them up. We were able to serve her with the petition. We were able to be in front of a judge and ask for full guardianship and a temporary so they can get the care, the children can get the care that they need. Our clients took them immediately to the doctor and found out Matthew had severe decay in his teeth. They had to be completely removed because they were affecting the bottom parts of his teeth. And little girl had diabetes type 1 since she was little. So it was care that was needed. It was care that had never been given to these children. But because our services were available, we were able to provide that service for them. Then, fortunately, we went through the guardianship process. Clients obtained full guardianship of their grandchildren. And I think it sparked mom's own embarrassment in sense of, what do I need to do to care for my children? This is a case that actually happened when I was just a new attorney, and mom has now gone through rehab. Mom is now working, and mom sees the children once a week. Now that's important because, again, we're not here to help just the person sitting in front of us. We're here to help, in this case, the 2 children that will eventually become adults that provide and care for their own children and are productive members of society, but also to change the lives of those parents who most of the time would consider as enemies. But how we approach it is, we want to do what's best for your child. You want to do that too. How can we help you be able to do that? And I think we're all on the same page with that. And it's been, again, that's one example of the cases that I deal with and our staff deals with every day. But it's a case that will have a lasting impact and a ripple effect in our community and our own futures. Thank you very much for your time.